I'm Isaac Cinnamon.
And I'm Carlos Grace, and we're Christians in Cinema.
And today, we're going into
The Shawshank Redemption.
Yes.
We're excited.
I'm excited.
This is a great movie. A lot of good stuff in here.
Yeah.
We watched it last night, so we had a fun time.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna get some good stuff out of it.
I saw this movie, I want to say a couple years ago.
Okay. First time?
For the first time, and I really loved it then. It's one of those movies that's like on my wall of movies.
Yeah.
It's just really good.
It's a great movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of good stuff in it.
Yeah. I feel like it's the same for me, probably like 3 years ago or so. So, good stuff.
But yeah, as we do, we're going to look at it through the lens of Jesus, see what he has to say in this. This is a movie about prison. It's a movie about suffering.
A lot of suffering, yeah.
It's a movie about hope in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And
finding hope.
Yeah.
Spreading hope.
The value of hope, really.
The value of hope, yeah. Even when others can't see it sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. So,
let's get into it, man.
Ready to dive in.
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
All right, so we're assuming you've seen the film, hopefully, by this point.
Spoiler warning.
Spoiler warning.
As with all of these.
Yes.
Hopefully you've watched it by now.
Yeah. So let's start.
Yep.
I think the character of Andy Dufresne is interesting because I think he could be very stale if not done correctly, if not written correctly and not acted correctly.
Yeah.
But it's not. He's very engaging. He's, kind of like how Red describes him of walking. He's like a guy without a care in the world almost.
Yeah. I think the narration helps a lot.
I think so
color
too.
His character.
Indeed.
But yeah, the writing's really good in this, and we start this whole story with Andy being convicted. He's being accused for murder of his wife,
double homicide,
and the man she was sleeping with. And yeah, right off the bat, we see this man. We don't know it for sure, but now that we've seen the film, we know he was wrongfully accused.
Yeah, he
was
did not
innocent.
kill.
Yeah.
The victims, and so we thought of Jesus in that sense of being wrongfully accused yet still convicted and still punished for something that he was not, he wasn't meant to be punished for.
Yeah.
And so obviously Andy Dufresne is a human, right? We believe Jesus is God, so there's a distinction in perfection there. But at the same time, I think it brings that to mind. Well,
yeah, it's like he is. It is an interesting thing to see a character that is very innocent in the beginning, at the very least.
Yeah.
And still being accused and having no control over it. It's pretty tragic, and it makes you think of Jesus and that, like, just the idea of being accused with like the highest
form of punishment.
Yeah. Of
all time, really.
And yet you're innocent,
Yeah.
And I think I do like, though, that he goes into it a little bit later. We'll get there. How even though he didn't pull the trigger, he still does feel like
guilty.
Yeah. Like he still caused this to happen.
Because of his actions and how he maybe didn't love her enough in the way that maybe he should have as a husband. He kind of drove her away.
Yeah.
In a sense, which is something to wrestle with as well, of how we're treating the other people in our life. Obviously, Red says you didn't pull the trigger, but still, he still is dealing with that guilt.
Well, yeah, it goes in, and it's both with his, like, maybe neglecting of her that he implied, but also with, like, her infidelity. Like, we don't sin in a vacuum that only hurts us. Like, what our choices affect
others,
everyone around us.
There's consequences to the sin.
We'd like to think that the things we choose to do only are bad for us, only hurt us, but it's
not the truth.
It's not the truth. It hurts everyone around us, and we definitely see that here. I mean, heck, the sin of the one man to murder these two people really hurt Andy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the two people he killed.
Yeah.
So.
And that, I think that calls to mind Jesus as well, as someone else did the murder and then he's convicted for it.
Yeah.
With while being innocent.
Like Barabbas.
Of like choosing both. Yeah.
obviously, redemption is in the title of the Shawshank Redemption, and that's also another really big theme of this, and kind of in a way like the transformation of this prison over the years through a lot of things, but a lot through Andy. You know,
a lot of change happens.
He brings a lot of the change in this place.
Yeah, he's a bit bold of a man.
Yeah, he's very bold.
Very bold.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. He also talks about, especially in the beginning when he's in his trial, he talks about being very angry and upset, so he doesn't remember what happens. And so his anger kind of led to confusion and to kind of not remembering things. And I think it's true of if we let anger and bitterness affect us to that point, right? We can have righteous anger. You know, Jesus had righteous anger at times. But having anger that just completely blinds you is dangerous and can lead you down the wrong path.
Yeah, being angry isn't sinful.
Yeah.
It's your reaction to it. It's what you do with that. Do you choose to trust God with that and give that to Him, or allow it to affect your decisions?
Right. Yeah.
Are you going to lash out with that? But being angry isn't a sin.
No.
Like, that's, God gets angry.
Yeah.
It's a natural thing.
It's a natural thing that happens. Yeah.
The difference is, what He does with that anger, what we do with that anger.
Yeah. And hate is not the same thing as anger.
Right.
Hate is a sin in the Bible. In fact, Jesus, goes so far as to say if you hate, it's like murdering your brother in your heart. Hate is that bad.
Which sucks, because that means we've all probably murdered someone along the way.
Yeah. It's always like that joke of like, oh, I'm going to kill my boss or something, right? And, and at some point in your heart, it seems like it could be that way.
Yeah.
Not that you're going to actually do it, but still.
Yeah.
It's the intention behind the heart.
Absolutely. Yeah, because He cares a lot more about the heart than the actual action,
Yeah.
Not that He doesn't care.
No, He cares about both, but He also, man looks at the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart.
Yeah. Kind of moving away from Andy, we have the other main character in this, Red, played by Morgan Freeman. Andy played by Tim Robbins, but Morgan Freeman in this really shines. Yeah, absolutely.
Indeed.
They both do. And we have this repeating thing throughout the film of Red's hearing.
Yeah.
He's going in for his parole hearing, and this happens 3 times. And the first 2 times, he kind of, gives like a textbook answer, and is like, "Do you feel rehabilitated?" It's like, "Oh, yes, sir. I feel I'm a completely new man, and I'm ready to re-enter the world."
I learned my lesson.
I learned my lesson, and they reject him every time. And then the last time he comes in, and instead of trying to please them, instead of trying to, try to tell them what he thinks they want to hear, he just tells the truth. And at the same time, like, it's also, maybe he is wiser and feels a lot more remorse of, like, I want to talk to my younger self.
Sure.
But when I watched that, and it made me think of sometimes how we pray to God. Yeah. We kind of can come before Him, and we can try to give Him the perfect words, or what we think He wants to hear, and not always speak from the heart. And I really like that in the end, when even though like He's kind of talking like down to them a little bit, like His words aren't like clean or nice, they're kind of rough.
Yeah.
It's from the truth, and that's what allows Him to
go back into the world.
To go back into the world.
Yeah, precisely.
I think that's how we can talk to God, is instead of trying to give Him the just right words, the perfect words. Yeah. He just wants to hear our heart, He already knows what's in it, so He just wants to hear it, whether you're angry at Him or you're sad or you're joyful, like whatever it is, He wants you to bring that before Him. And I fall into that too often, of just getting in the routine of like, all right, this is how I should pray. These are the right words to say.
The traditional prayers and all that. Yeah, because God works in the messiness of our lives, right? That's where He shines the most. Paul was like talking to God, like, "Hey, can you remove this thorn out of my side?" Not a literal thorn, but a metaphorical one of like something's hurting me. And God said, no, because my power is made perfect in your weakness, right? So and then Paul's like, well, I will boast all the more of my weakness, because then I am strong, right? When I am weak, then I am strong. So being real with God, and we had that. I think it was a sermon Pastor Jeff did, a college pastor here in Savannah, and he said, just be real with God. You know, like it just changes everything when you just open everything up to him. And it's messy sometimes, and it's scary to go into that, but it's going to feel a whole lot better, and God's going to start healing you a whole lot faster.
Yeah. God's been doing this a long time.
Ooh, a real long time.
And I assure you, he's dealt with humans with much like crazier things and more hateful things going on, you know?
Yeah.
All that to say, God's not afraid of our words or us being angry at him. Like, us being angry at him, it doesn't, he's not like, oh, well, you're mad, I'm going to push you away. Like, just like you would, like, rant to a friend or something, like, that hopefully, like, draws you in to say, hey, like, trust me enough to be able to tell me all these things. I don't just want the happy side of you, or I don't just want the face. I want the real, raw, what's actually going on inside part of you. I think that's what God wants from us.
I think so too.
Yeah.
And it feels a lot better when you're just straight honest with God. You know, it's like, although, right, like you said, he knows, but it almost feels like you're not hiding anything. You're like, here, God, this is what I feel, and I'm broken and I need you.
I lay it all out before you, you know. The good, bad, and the ugly. Yeah.
He's not called the Good Shepherd for nothing.
Absolutely.
So, cool. So we want to talk about punishment and judgment and how man deals with it versus how God deals with it. We see, obviously, there's a sort of injustice that Andy gets, taken to jail for evidence that seems that does kind of go against him, to be honest, which is something maybe he shouldn't have done. He had a gun and bullets and a bottle of alcohol. And it's interesting because humans sometimes like to criticize when God has a certain judgment, like, oh, he's so harsh, especially like if we talk about the Old Testament. It's like God's very harsh, and like I thought he was supposed to be merciful and all that, but then humans, when something small happens, we say, oh, go to hell, like the people who cut us off on the road. And obviously that's an expression as well, but what we're trying to get to is that humans also have a sense of justice, and that comes from God, right? And that can be a good thing, but we also use it as a way, in a bad way too. We're obviously broken, so we obviously do justice in a broken way. And God knows how to do justice in the perfect way. And that's why in the Bible it says not to take revenge, because God will do, he says vengeance is mine. But God also knows exactly when to give mercy as well. Because if you do revenge and let's say, I don't know, you kill someone, right, out of revenge, like, oh, it was deserved. It's like, maybe. But at the same time, what if that person had repented of their sins and had found God before then? You just kind of stole that chance almost. So.
For sure. And it is hard because there is something that's in us that feels what right and wrong, that wants to see justice. We want justice served.
And that's a good thing.
And that's a very human, real thing that God's put in us. And we're meant to discern. Like, we're meant to look at the world around us and not just be blind to it, but see the things that are right and wrong. But I think at the core of it, ultimate judgment comes from God. He is the ultimate judge. He's the one who decides. It's not really our place to like throw out that judgment on others in our day-to-day lives. So having said that, it makes a very good question and kind of a wrestling thing for us of, like, obviously the prison depicted in this movie, it's a story being told. It's not based off a true story. I'm sure it's based off of true experiences of prison. I'm sure all aren't as bad. Some are probably worse, in how they're run.
Sure.
So I guess that is the question, is that we have to have some sort of checks and balances.
Sure.
But how far does that go?
How does that go? Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think, there's also the sense of God works through our brokenness, absolutely. He's been doing that since the dawn of man.
Yeah.
But being aware and not just being like, oh, well, he'll fix it, and if it needs fixing, we really should be tuning into the will of God and discerning what we should be doing and how we should forgive. I mean, God forgives us so much. Not just the outward actions, but also the interior, the thoughts, the voices, the heart. Really, the heart is deceitful above all else.
Absolutely.
So
yeah,
we need to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah, and I think the main takeaway for us is that in our day-to-day lives, we need to look at the things around us, the actions, people around us, and we need to be able to discern, to be able to say, what is right, what is wrong. But it's not our place to go and push that on that person or even think of that person differently. Yeah. There's that verse that's like, don't try to take the speck out of your brother's eye when you've got the log in your own.
Yeah, that's a great passage. I love that.
We are all guilty, right?
Yeah.
No one, we like to be like, well, I'm not as bad as this bad.
Right.
I'm
that's
something
worse.
better.
Yeah. At least I didn't do that.
At least I didn't do that. But it's like, no, we're all bad. So we're really in no place to put that judgment on others. I think we need to take those things to God and maybe to the people we trust and have those conversations more so.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
Mm-hmm. And then you move on from that. There was a line still like in Andy's trial at the beginning. Where they're talking about his wife cheating on him, and I think it's the lawyer or something that is like, asked something like, was death what they deserved, like for that?
Yeah, I mean, he was like, oh, okay. It's like, well, cheating, she committed a sin, but was death the punishment for that, and not in human ways, no. Humans are not, that's not meant to be carried out by humans.
The revenge thing, what we were just talking about.
Yeah, she was not meant to die by human hands.
Yeah, maybe she deserves that, but not from us, right?
But the key thing is not just her, but Andy and the guy, she was cheating on, and Red. Right. Everyone has this kind of punishment, right, for what they've done. There has to be some sort of justice in that.
Yeah.
But then God also offers us mercy through Christ.
Right, and so that line was very reminiscent of just the question that I think is tough for all of us. Is like, okay, maybe I sinned, but is that really is death the punishment for that? And that's a hard thing to wrestle with.
It's hard for us too. Yeah. I mean, it's something to wrestle with.
Yeah,
but
I think it's less though. I think it's more the nature of God than the sentence that He gives us. Yeah. I think it's more that it's not that we sin and so God says, okay, death.
Yeah.
Death. It's more that us with God is life. Yeah. God is life. Yeah. And so when we sin, we physically cannot be with Him. So instead of it being an action of, all right, you now get death, it's more of there's this disconnect here, and so I can't reach life.
Yeah.
And so that's what we mean when it's like, oh, death is the punishment. Is like death is separation from God. That's something more than we've even experienced.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what hell is basically just complete separation from God. I mean, no ounce of water, right?
Yeah.
And that's why the earth is mixed between good and evil, right? Because God still dwells on the earth, but so does Satan, right?
Right.
So does evil.
Satan's
sort of kingdom, in a way.
Yeah.
That will eventually fall.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and it's a good. That's also kind of good what we were talking about. We know very little about the afterlife.
Yeah. We don't know how everything works.
We know very, very little.
Yeah.
But what we do know is that we have an image of hell in our heads, and I think a lot of people have okay, well, I'm going to go to the bad place where we party all the time and just do all the debauchery,
drinking and sex, and
it's which is basically Earth anyway. But we think, or we think of it as this fiery place, and that's because of imagery in the Bible.
Sure.
But I think the main hellish part of eternal damnation of hell is the separation from God. It's not the suffering is not being with Him and knowing that He's there, but not being able to be with him.
Yeah.
I think that's real hell.
Yeah. And the chance that you have here to repent of sin, right? He's not asking you to be perfect, right? He knows you can't be perfect, but he is asking you to accept his forgiveness, his gift through Jesus, right? What Jesus does on the cross is he takes the full punishment of sin, right? Because he doesn't want us to feel that punishment.
Yeah.
Only God can take that on. So he himself sacrifices himself for us to eliminate that debt. It's like basically a receipt, right? We can't pay the receipt, it's too much.
Yeah.
And he pays it for us. It says
Way
paid
too
in
much.
full by Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And so all you have to do is accept that and repent. And he's like, you're forgiven. I put my righteousness on you.
Yeah. But it's a tough thing.
It is.
Death. And it feels unfair, but the real unfairness is that we are given life in return, that which we do not deserve at all.
Yeah. You don't have to earn it. It's God, instead of us working to God, it's God coming down to us and giving us this righteousness. He made it simple for us.
Yeah. Preach, Carlos, preach, tell him.
It's coming out, the Holy Spirit.
Yes. So we get to the prison. Let's get into this prison.
Do we have to?
We kind of do.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're gonna miss
Like most of the film.
all of the movie.
Okay.
We get here and we see a very complicated character of the warden, or maybe not so complicated, maybe just evil.
Yeah.
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 In a lot of
just
ways.
Evil. The Warden Norton. He's an interesting guy because he's the warden of this prison, and he's a nice old Christian Bible believing believer, right?
Yeah. He talks about the good book, no blaspheming in the prison.
There's salvation within. He's got the little cross on his suit.
He's the good guy of this story,
He's the
right?
good guy.
He's the protagonist because he's got the Bible.
How wrong is that? You didn't watch the film, didn't you?
I hope no one takes that out of context and just pulls that out and is like, "Wow, look at these."
Look at these Christian hobos. It's this really interesting scene where we meet him for the first time, and it's like Andy and all the new prisoners come in, and they're like gonna get stripped from their clothes, and he introduces himself, and he's like, you do what I say and all that, and he's like, and I will have no, blaspheme of the Lord's name, which we believe, right? Don't take the Lord's name in vain.
Sure.
And immediately after, one of the prisoners asks a question, and the warden looks at one of the guards, and he's like nods over to him, and he yells at the prisoner, and then beats him with one of the batons.
Swearing at him, and it's like,
yeah,
I'm sure God wanted that. And so I think this is a very important character, and it might be like some believers might be uncomfortable with it, of like, oh no,
they're portraying the Christian as a bad guy.
But I think this is an important, and it's a great message in how people can use the Bible for evil, or religion for evil. I mean, anyone with a pulse knows that religion is often used for evil, and we agree with that, even within the Christian community.
We do,
unfortunately, and I think just knowing the Bible does not make you Christian, because clearly he knew the Bible, or at least parts of
his idea, yeah.
But the Bible even says that even demons know the Bible front to back, and they're demons. So it's not just the knowing of it; it really is the heart behind it and the finding God in it. And
it's not being a scholar of the Bible. You can be a scholar and yet not be saved.
Yeah,
it's just accepting it, right? And having a relationship with God.
Yeah, and clearly, again, this is tough because it is a justice system where they're meant to be paying for their crimes. But at the same time, this movie, I think, makes it very clear that they sympathize with the prisoners a lot.
Yeah.
And you have this warden that's using religion or using the Bible as like a large whip almost, and it's hard to see. It's sad to see, but it's a great example of sometimes the legalism, like his whole like starting rule, like his first line is, first rule of prison or something, no blaspheming. I will not have the Lord's name taken in vain in this house. And it's like, okay, you've got like a rule there, and clearly you're establishing that you believe in the good book.
Yeah.
But then, like you were saying, the violence right after is like, I feel like he's missing the point, because the point of the rules isn't the rules, it's what's behind them.
Well, I see it either as, I think there's like three options. Either he thinks it's right because it's like, oh, they're sinners, right? We gotta beat them down and get that, almost like a purgatory in a sense,
Not the case.
Yeah.
Because clearly he was very much a sinner throughout the rest of the film.
Oh my goodness, he was not
exploiting.
We're gonna get into him.
Yeah.
The second thing I think is he could just not believe. Is the fact he just could be saying it because he thinks he should say it. He was raised that way, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Third thing, he's being convicted, but he's not listening to the conviction. He's like, oh, I'll get to that later. Right?
Sure. Well, we see it a lot is when people in power, when followers in power get into power, it's very easy to abuse that and for it to be corrupt. We see it in the Bible with the Sadducees. That's what happened is the Jewish priests, they rose in power and basically formed this like what we
kind of elite group.
Yeah, almost. Elite group. And we see it in like mega churches today of how, maybe there's some truth there. Maybe there even was some sort of conviction there at some point, but it's clearly, looking on from the outside, like gone off the rails of where God's called it, and it's become more about me and raising myself up.
Raising money for myself.
And the power that comes with it. Because we so easily convince ourselves, we're like, well, I'm doing this for God. Like we stamp God on the reason, and we're like, I'm doing it for God, so obviously I have to make money for myself so that I can continue to glorify God.
Right.
I think it's a great cautionary tale of warning of like what we could possibly fall into if like God prospers us, not forgetting that it's Him who prospered us. We didn't do that, and not abusing whatever He gives us to steward.
Right. Yeah. Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's basically just cherry picking the Bible. We talked about that. He's taken things that he thinks are right, and then the other things he's just kind of throwing away. And it's obvious stuff too. It's like violence.
He's deceitful.
He cheats people.
Yeah.
He's doing it for money. So obviously not a good dude.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet there's forgiveness for him if he decides to repent.
Well, he didn't.
He didn't. Yeah, unfortunately. But well, I'm sure we'll get to that. Later. But yeah. So I think we kind of nailed down a few points of like the main things of this movie, and one of them was how to live in suffering. The big thing of this film is pretty much suffering throughout the whole film.
Yeah.
They have a joke throughout is you're gonna fit right in. Everyone's innocent in here, right? It's a way for people to keep their spirits up, I suppose.
Yeah.
But everyone's guilty, even if you're not in prison. Obviously, we put people in prison for some outward actions that are pretty concerning.
Yeah.
Right. And
it's a lot of like a protection thing.
Right, for others. Yeah. It's almost like, like wearing a mask, right? You do it for others, not always for yourself.
Right.
So Andy is pretty much put through hell.
Yeah.
Through this entire film, from just all sorts of terrible things.
In so many ways. With the sisters, with being put in prison in the first place.
Just being there for like 20 years.
I do like, and this just came to me, but I do like sort of like the Bible verse, he's innocent as a dove, but he's shrewd as a snake.
Yeah.
I think that describes him very well, because he goes in completely innocent, and actually innocent, not just innocent like everyone says they are in the prison.
Yeah, he's actually innocent.
But then he's very shrewd in like all of his actions.
Yeah, he's smart.
Like how he offers to help the guard keep all his money.
Sure.
How he kind of gets into this position where he
can ask for things.
Yeah, rises up in power.
Yeah.
kind of makes me think of Joseph in a way, how he was thrown in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and then later, just raised into
Rose to
power because
yeah.
because of the gifts God gave him.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Sorry, went off on a little
good
bit of
story though. Good story.
a little bit of a trail there, but
Yeah.
Andy absolutely suffered, and
Yeah.
it's a hard thing because it's like, well, clearly he didn't deserve this.
Yeah.
But I think the question we have to ask through that is, was he better because of it? Did it gain him anything?
Yeah.
Would he have been the man he ended up to be without
that
it?
suffering?
And that's not to say that, they should have been like beating him and doing that. But with the circumstances he was given, is it all for naught?
Nothing,
or is there good within that?
Right, because there's that Bible verse, God takes evil and he turns it into good. Right, God can use that. And it's a mystery sometimes, like why do we have to go through certain things, right?
Yeah.
The question is if we put ourselves in that position by our actions, right? Andy was drinking that night, chose to get drunk, chose to get his gun out, and kind of convicted himself in a sense.
He didn't put himself in the best position. That's for sure.
So we also have to look at our actions and being like, is this the smart and wise thing to do?
Yeah. But I also think like the difference between this and maybe our relationship with God is I don't want to give the impression that like this, when we do something bad or close to bad, then there's like a reactionary like suffering.
Yeah.
That's not how God works.
That's not how
because first of all, whether you're doing great or not, we're doing bad all the time.
Yeah.
We're just that's our human nature.
That's the nature of it.
Of being apart from God.
Yeah.
And there are, I think we read it like in the Lord of the Rings podcast of the different seasons, but there are seasons of suffering, and that's a really hard thing, and that's one of the world's biggest struggles with God in general is how can a loving God allow so much suffering?
Right.
And that's a really great thing to wrestle with because it's true. And we could go into literally like millions, billions of examples.
Yeah.
But especially when you're in that hurt, it's really hard to see where God could be in that.
Yeah. And the Bible, like, if you've never read the Bible isn't like some sort of fantasy, like everyone's happy all the time. The Bible is probably one of the hardest books to get through sometimes, especially if you look at the Old Testament. But we talked about this too, where like Paul, went from persecuting Christians to becoming literally one of the biggest, an example of a true apostle, of setting up so much of the early church, especially in Gentile regions. And the amount of suffering that he went through, he got thrown in prison, he got beat, and eventually he got beheaded. He was martyred for his faith.
And yet he counted it all joy.
He counted it all joy.
Paul's such a great, we go on and on about Paul.
We go back.
We probably glorify him a little too much, to be honest. Sorry, God. But
thank you, God, for Paul as well.
Yeah, but thank you for his story. But he suffered so much. He was put in prison. He was, persecuted. He was beaten down.
Yeah.
He just had so much struggle, in a lot of ways, like Andy, just, more from a preaching side of it.
Indeed.
But despite that, he says, like, count it all joy.
Count it all joy.
In my suffering.
Yeah.
To live as Christ and to die as gain, he says. And that really shows, like, his mentality and the mentality of when you have God, when he's with you, when you trust him and believe in him, even when they're suffering, that in some way he's in it, that he's either going to grow you through it to a place you might not have been without it, that he's going to give you an experience that it just hurts on every single level, but may allow you later down the line to be able to help someone else going through it. And it's, I don't need to say it, everyone knows it, but it's really hard in the moment. And it's hard to to come to God and say, all right, I trust you through this. Like, I rarely am able to do it.
Yeah.
But when you are able to do it and you're saying, God, I feel like I'm being beaten down and I don't know the reason why. I feel like I'm being persecuted for no reason.
Yeah.
This has been taken from me. This has happened to me. I've lost, whatever it is. It's like the strength to be able to say, but God, I know it's not for nothing.
I know it's
like,
not for nothing.
There's a reason from it. And the hard part is not understanding always what the reason is.
Yeah.
But there's always a reason for it. God doesn't just do stuff flippantly.
Yeah, it's not like, suffering here. Suffering.
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't hand out suffering.
Yeah.
But he lets certain things happen so that it grows
but
us.
It hurts him too. And
does.
I think that's
He
the part
suffers
we
with
miss,
us.
is that we can see him as like this puppet master that's moving things
Yeah.
around that doesn't have an effect on him. But like,
It does.
sin broke the world, broke his creation, and so when somebody dies or
gets hurt.
when there's wars break out, when there's child like molesting, and it's like, and we're like, God, why did you let this happen? God is much more heartbroken than we could ever be, because this is his creation. He knows it in and out, and he sees how corrupt and perverted and broken
he
it's
sees
gotten.
everything. We see such a small amount of it. If we saw everything that God said, we wouldn't be able to take it.
Yeah.
And we know like wars and, like you said, child molesting, but God sees everything, all of the corruption, past, present, and future, all in one, and yet he still chooses to forgive us as humanity.
Yeah, he still chooses to pursue us.
Yeah.
He sees all that, and he makes covenants, and he sends floods to wipe away the bad. And when the bad comes back, he sends his son. He sends himself as his son to die for us. And even still, having done that, the world is broken and corrupt. But thank God, literally, that's not where the story ends. That there is hope that one day all of evil, all sadness and
taken away,
hurt will be eradicated and made new.
Yeah.
And that's what we hold on to, is that this is just a moment. Even if it feels so long, this is still just a moment. We're only here on earth for a second.
Yeah, it's like the thing of like, oh, life is short, enjoy it, but also remember, eternity is long, so prepare for it.
That's good.
That's good. I remember you were talking about how God cares a lot about our suffering, and it reminds me of watching this YouTube video of a man who had a vision with Jesus. I don't know if he was asleep or he just had this vision, and Jesus walked with him through heaven, and he showed him a room that was filled with bottles. And they were bottles of tears, right? They were people's tears from all over the world. And they were still like being filled, right? There was water being filled in because it was people's tears. And the man was surprised that there were, heroes of the faith like Paul and Peter and Mary. And then we had like people who were absolutely terrible, right? Like who murdered and all this. And he was offended. He was like, Jesus, why are there these awesome people next to these like terrible people? And Jesus said, the Father loves them all the same. And then in the middle of the room, I think it was the middle of the room, there was this gigantic bottle of tears, and it was Jesus' bottle of tears. He had the most tears out of anyone in that room because Jesus suffers with us, right? Mm-hmm. He is the suffering servant.
Yeah.
And so it just goes to show that he's there for us, and he goes with us through the suffering. We're not alone.
Yeah. Yeah, and speaking to that, speaking to suffering, I don't know, you're the one who suggested this verse, so maybe you should read it. But this verse kind of rings out for the truth of basically the whole movie, the whole film is kind of summed up in this verse, or a lot of this suffering.
Yeah. This is Romans chapter 5, verse 3. Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope. And hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us.
So yeah, that is, And it ties in hope too, which this movie also does. We'll get into it. I swear we'll get back to Shawshank. We're getting there. But yeah, this verse of that suffering leads to endurance.
Yeah.
You know, suffering is not meaningless. There is something that it's doing. There is something that we're able to connect with God in that we're not able to if everything was just fine.
Yeah.
Like if everything was fine, everything was perfect, why would we need God?
Yeah.
You know?
And the thing is, we need God because He created us, right?
Absolutely.
He saves us. And I think it's why it almost touches us when we watch films of suffering, like why we like Lord of the Rings or why we like Shawshank or why we like any of these films, because not only is it complicated and it's interesting, but it also, I think, speaks to our human experience of like, oh wow, okay, this suffering has a higher purpose, right? Obviously the films typically show the end result of that suffering.
Yeah.
But we're going to see it too in our lives.
There's something in us, whether you believe in God or not, that resonates with suffering and longs for more meaning in it. Because if there's no meaning in suffering, then it's just suffering.
Yeah.
And it's
horrible. There's no value in it.
Yeah.
Right.
So this movie explores that a lot, and yeah, it's a really good thing to wrestle with.
Yeah. And that ties into sometimes our mission field is brutal, but it's exactly where we're needed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think of how like Andy reacts to his environment. Like obviously they kind of describe him as like he's very odd, you know, he doesn't quite fit in. But he's exactly where he's needed. You see the change he brings to Shawshank because he sees like, you know, what so many people in that prison lost about themselves. He sees the humanity in everyone, and so he continues to do things like writing a letter a week or 2 letters a week to get books to build a library or to get beers for his coworkers. Yeah. Even though he didn't deserve to be there, I'd almost argue that's exactly where he was needed.
Because he made the people around him, their life better.
Yeah, and that's a great lesson for us, is that sometimes God puts us in places, and this is so true, sometimes God puts us in places that make no sense to us, that are not fun, that are just difficult and just feel like suffering. But the truth is that there's a reason behind it, and we usually won't always know the reason. God might reveal some of that to us. But God doesn't, again, just like the suffering, God doesn't just throw us somewhere for no reason. Like He puts us where we are for a reason, maybe for the people around us, maybe to change something in us. Yeah. Maybe it doesn't have to do with us at all, but it's something about us being there is changing the environment around us that needs to be changed.
Yeah. Not complain about your circumstances. That's good.
Yeah. And speaking to the to Andy's oddballness, you had kind of noted that like he's very calm and peaceful. And
obviously I'm sure he's in turmoil within. I think Red makes constant mention of him being by himself and just kind of thinking things through. I'm sure a lot was on his mind, he kind of always says. But he never complains, really. I mean, I'm sure there's moments of outbursts in the film. I can't recall any, but he doesn't complain about his circumstances. You know, he never made a sound. I think that stuck with us. And like the first night they were betting, you know, who of the new guys was gonna make a sound, and they were like, the old prisoners were betting on that, and they were like, Andy never made a sound. And I think sometimes we have to be calm and peaceful even when we don't understand what's going on, and even though we're suffering or about to go through suffering that we know we're gonna go through. I think that's powerful. It's a good message.
I think that's the kind of thing that we bring to God, that we go back to like Red's hearing of being honest about, is like when you're suffering, even if you feel like God's the one that put you in there, like, speak that out to Him. Like even be like, God, why did you do this? Like I don't like this. No. Like those are the kind of things, those are the moments that you can really engage and talk with God about, and then be refilled or go back into the circumstances with a new heart and and making a difference by not being like everyone else, not maybe complaining or
Right.
you know, people are like, you know, man, don't you hate it here? And you're like, yeah, but it's where I need to be. You know?
Yeah. And that can change people's outlook as well.
Yeah, a certain peacefulness in that.
Yeah.
And we kind of talked about, like, with the beers and
Yeah.
with the moment where he plays music, which is such a beautiful moment.
Yeah.
Of how he, in a lot of ways, like, put himself on the line
Sure.
for the people around him.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
And giving them hope,
Mm-hmm.
you know, especially, you know, when they're like, what is Andy doing, you know? And it pays off at the end, his boldness, but his love for his friends as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that he calls them coworkers, you know, the guards start laughing when he calls them me and my coworkers, but it's true, right?
Yeah. I really do love Red's line where he talks about, like, you know, some people think he did it to make some friends or get close with the guards. But me, I think he just did it to feel human again.
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of what he was doing, like continuing to do things to make his fellow man feel free.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I didn't know what those women were singing about, but that, for the briefest of moments, every man in Shawshank felt free.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's really, I
That's
love
good
that.
stuff. Even if it goes against the human authority sometimes, you know.
Yeah, that's a hard thing to navigate too, but
Yeah.
it's true. There were a couple verses referenced, like, directly in the film
Yeah.
too, which we
Between the warden and Andy.
which we kind of wanted to read about because obviously the filmmakers put them in there.
Let's talk about it.
Why put them in there?
Yeah. First one, Mark 13:35. This is Andy telling the warden, I think, what one of his favorite verses is.
Yeah.
And he says, Mark 13:35, "Therefore stay awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or at midnight or when the rooster crows or in the morning."
Which I think is funny because
Yeah.
it's like the moment where they're like searching his
little
you know,
bunk or whatever.
Yeah, his cell, and he's like, yeah, just always be ready when you're about to come and
Yeah.
mess up everything I've made.
Yeah.
But I also just really like that verse in general.
Yeah.
It's a good reminder for us to stay ready because we truly don't know when
Christ will return.
Christ will return. The return of the King.
Dun, dun.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And then the other verse,
Yes.
John 8:12, which the warden says back to him, which is a little less direct of a reference to the situation, I feel like. He said, again, Jesus spoke to them saying, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." So maybe that was the warden kind of putting himself in the role of God, being like, you know, I'm the light of the world. You know, follow me and you'll be fine. You know, is kind of probably how he was like twisting that verse.
Sure. It almost makes him seem sort of like good, like it's a sweet verse. You're gonna be in the light. You know, obviously that doesn't turn out to be so for the warden.
Oh man.
But it's almost like when I saw it, I was like, oh, I thought he was gonna like pull out like some weird verse or something.
Yeah.
But he pulled out kind of a sweet verse, and I was like, okay, this is definitely like, I think trying to make us conflicted on who this guy is. But as we go through the movie, we see kind of his true colors.
You know, I just realized what's ironic about that. So it says, whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. But through working with him, the amount of time that Andy spent in that dark hole of solitary confinement kind of goes exactly against what he just said. It's like, follow me and you won't be in darkness. But he literally spent 2 months in darkness because of the warden.
Yeah,
that's
needlessly too.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I love the Bible setup with the rock hammer of salvation lies within.
Yeah,
quite literally.
Yeah.
He also has that picture in his room.
Yeah.
Which we tried to look into. I don't think it's a verse, or maybe it's like a twisting of a verse, but it says, "Judgment cometh, and that right soon."
And we constantly see it, and it's interesting because it's like this, you know, it's something sweet that his wife made, like, crocheted or whatever.
Yeah.
And behind it is the safe where he keeps all his like money laundering stuff.
It was like,
and it's like, oh, I see where this guy's going.
Keep all your shady dealings right behind the judgment.
Yeah. Which we kind of talk about of how evil people sometimes will hide or mask themselves in false righteousness, appearing righteous. Oh, I got this Bible verse. I constantly carry my Bible. I got the cross, on my little suit, and I have this nice. My wife made it for me. She made it in church group, and then behind that is the ugly stuff, and behind it's the money laundering. Behind it's the evil and the cursing and the violence.
Yeah.
So it's almost, I think it's a metaphor for basically who the warden is and what he cares about.
Absolutely, and that false righteousness for sure. Yeah. Taking advantage of the power. Also, we mentioned kind of Andy's persistence and sending like a letter a week. Yeah. And that kind of made us both like individually. We both take notes during this, and it's really funny when we just come out and like our notes just line up and are like
overlapping.
The same notes. But we both talked about how him sending those letters literally for 6 years, every week for 6 years, like over 300 letters.
Yeah.
And his letters were answered. How it's a lot like praying.
Yeah. Yeah. We said, always pray, ask, seek, knock, right? I think, what does God say? Pulling up the Bible verse now.
It's Matthew 7:7. Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you.
For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks it will be opened.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I've kind of learned about this where it's like praying to God isn't necessarily a wish list. It's often supposed to be talking to Him, but in that moment, like you're talking to God, like ask Him what's on your heart. He wants to know what's on your heart, and He knows those desires are there, and He can help you, find if those desires are good or not. But typically a prayer isn't answered like through one prayer. I mean, often, sometimes it can, because God can do anything. But a lot of our prayers, especially when we're, seeking something in our hearts, it takes a continuous like, hey God, like asking, seeking, knocking, like, I know you already know this is on my heart, but I'm going to just keep asking. It's that persistence.
Yeah. And it's not because God is like, I don't want to I got to give it to this guy now because he keeps asking, which is what they do in the movies, like stop sending us letters.
Please stop sending us letters.
We got enough. God's like the opposite. It's like, please keep sending prayers because I do hear you, right? And sometimes we're like, well, I asked, why doesn't it happen? And it's typically because He wants us to keep seeking, right? There's a sense of patience and trust in Him that He wants us to develop, but also maybe it's just not the right time. Or it's never going to be the time, depending on what you're asking for, right?
Yeah. But that's the thing, is if you continue to come to God and truly be praying with Him, then He'll probably start to put in your heart if that desire is from Him, or if it's more self-centered, or something that isn't in His will. If you continue to go to Him, He'll reveal to you if the things that you want are good or not. And if you continue to go to Him and continue to feel that desire burning in you, then that's probably something to continue to bring to Him.
Yeah, and it's always a good prayer to be like, align my will with yours. Because a lot of the times our wills are selfish, which we know, right? And it's good to keep in mind.
Not my will, then, Lord, but yours.
But yours.
I pray that.
And it can be hard
a lot
too.
Yeah.
But I'm reminded of this verse that I really do like. It's Jeremiah 29:13 that says, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." And I think there's another verse where it's like, "I will be found by you," right? Like if you seek me, I will be found by you. But you have to seek with all your heart. So anyone who's questioning whether, okay, if God is even real, if you seek Him with all your heart, you're going to find Him.
Yeah.
It may not be in the way you think it'll look like, but it'll happen.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I noticed that I just saw like an interesting little comparison to, I didn't think of before, is that you have Brooks, who goes on parole, and you also, at the end, have Red that goes on parole. They both go to the same room, they get the same job, they have like similar experiences. I think by the time Red got out, he was in there maybe like 15 years less than Brooks. So he'd still been there like pretty much all of his life. And I thought it was interesting because obviously Brooks commits suicide in his room. And Red, you see, also talks about like every day, like the same stuff. Like I think about what I can do to go back, and it's like I don't think I'm gonna make it out here. But there's a difference in reaction there because Red holds on to hope. You know, that the hope that Andy had given him of this promise to go find whatever Andy had buried. And I thought it was an interesting like kind of comparison of how Brooks reacted versus how Red reacted. Kind of made me think for some reason of Judas and Peter, because obviously both of them turned from God or turned from Jesus in their own ways. Yeah. But you see the difference in the reactions of Judas committing suicide, like also hanging himself, but Peter being redeemed, you know, coming back and, you know, Jesus asking 3 times, Peter, do you love me? Yeah. Peter, do you love me? Peter, do you love me? And Peter answering, yes, yes, you know I do, Lord. Yeah. And so I just, you know, it's so, you know, it's a loose comparison but I wonder if it's something the filmmakers were doing, because you do have these 2 men who both had similar situations who reacted in different ways.
Yeah. And you know, Red also almost went to suicide, but the only thing that was holding him was the promise that he had with Andy of, you know, going to that place. And I think that kind of sparks the promise of Jesus in our lives of I will forgive you and I will bring you redemption and sanctify you. And I think that's what Peter held on to.
Maybe it's what Peter was holding on to of that small sliver of hope, you know, however little it might have been in that moment. So I thought that was an interesting thing. If anyone wants to look into that more and find if there's more to unravel there, let me know.
When Brooks leaves when he has parole and he goes into the big wide world, obviously, you know, it's a lot different for him. He's an old man now, and it's the 50s, sad. Right? Yeah. And, you know, he talks about, like, so many, you know, he saw, you know, an automobile once when he was a kid, and now they're everywhere.
Yeah. I mean, he missed 2 world wars, Great Depression, like, he missed
a lot of stuff.
So much.
Yeah. And just what he says something about, like, the world went into, like, a whole big, like, hurry. Like, it got in a hurry. And there's a sense, too, of a false busyness, of always thinking that there's something that has to be done in the sense of worldly activities or worldly jobs and things of like, I constantly have to do this, I have to do that. And while it is true, like, and we obviously know as students in SCAD that there is a lot of stuff there is to be done. Yep. But not letting it become something that drains you or that takes you out of the will of God, or, you know what I mean? That kind of like pulling you away from also the stuff that truly matters, right? Because false busyness won't really get you anywhere in the end, right?
Yeah.
So it's a balance of both, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was a cool thing you drew from, especially just how the world kind of advances in general, of how we seem to just get busier, you know. But yeah, I think the line from him was, "I can't believe how fast things move on the outside." It's like, I feel that, buddy.
Yeah.
Maybe not the way you feel it, but
in a way.
Yeah. Brooks is very tragic. I hope Jake is finding new friends. Like we talked about, Andy continued to do things to make others feel free. He was really like, so much of him was about instilling hope and trying to bring hope back to the prisoners. Maybe the difference in him was that he was innocent, and so, I don't know, because he still felt guilty. I don't know what was different about Andy that helped him hold on to hope. Maybe because for so long he was like burrowing out, so he knew he would be able to escape at any time.
Maybe.
But there is something about Andy where he held on to hope, and he tried to get others around him to see it. He has this line after he spends 2 weeks in the hole for pulling the music record stunt. He's like, there's something inside they can't get to, can't touch, and it's hope. And you have this conflict between Andy and Red of Red's like, you know, it's the hope that'll kill you. Like, the hope will drive you crazy in here. And and Andy, holds on to it, even through the worst of things.
Yeah, and it reminds me too of like you say, he's innocent and he's in this terrible place, and yet he gives freedom, or at least a feeling of freedom to the prisoners. And that reminds me of Jesus too, is he's innocent, yet he's convicted, and yet he brings freedom to the people who come to him and the people who actually know him, right, as friends.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, it really speaks to the fact that there's always a choice to seize hope.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what we were getting at through like the suffering, but through God, there's always a choice to seize hope. Even if it's faint, like there's always hope in God. He is hope.
Yeah, He is love. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's an intentional choice. You can choose, if you want, to be miserable, but you can also say, no, I'm going to hope in God, because there's joy in the morning.
Yeah, and you had two people in there with the same circumstances, Andy might have even been dealing with a little worse, I mean, having been 2 weeks in the hole.
Yeah.
But then yet he comes back and you have these two men, Red and Andy, and even though Andy's also suffering, he's holding on to hope.
Yeah.
He holds on to hope, and it changes everything about how he acts. It affects all of it.
Sure. Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah.
Really good stuff.
Hold on to hope. Hold on to hope in God.
Yeah. He will give it to you.
Yeah.
You can ask him for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he'll have it. Also, Andy believes in others that don't believe in themselves. I guess the main one is Tommy.
Yeah, we see that a lot with Tommy, which also so tragic.
Yeah. Andy gives him hope by helping him with his, he wants to get his high school diploma, right? He's maybe late 20s kind of, or early 30s kind of guy who's been in and out of prison. He has a young wife and a little girl, and he's in prison, and that drives him to kind of want to do better.
Yeah.
And he's like, okay, you want to make this choice. So are you, if we do it, we got to go all the way.
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah. And so they go through it together, and he actually passes. He gets his high school diploma. But Tommy knows what actually happened. He was cellmates earlier with a man who killed actually Andy's wife and her lover.
Yeah.
And Andy goes to the warden and say, hey, this could get me my freedom. He's he can testify. And because of that, the warden throws him into the hole for a month.
Darkness. Throws him in darkness. Which, by the way, he goes into the hole for a month, which is already pretty crazy because it's solitary. It's a tiny dark room. You only get food. That's your only stimulation. Borderline, crazy. And then he gets 2 months. He spends 2 months in the hole. This is unrelated. I don't think you could survive that long in solitary. I think mentally, your brain would fail. It would go insane. There would be mental repercussions for spending that long in solitary. That's all I'll say. That's
you can only do it with God.
That's like a movie magic kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know.
I mean, there could be cases of that happening. I don't know.
I don't know. I don't know if that's based in reality, but I feel like medically, that long.
2 months is a lot.
60 days
with no break in between.
Alone.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah. We don't know. We don't really see if maybe the guards talk to him, because there's a time where, hey, you got the diploma.
Yeah.
And something. So there could be maybe some sort of interaction with that. Maybe they're required to.
Maybe.
So they don't go insane.
Yeah. That's just crazy to me.
Yeah.
Let's see. We talked about how often the corrupt will hide themselves behind, righteousness, or throw up the Bible and be like, well, God told me to.
Yeah. When really it's just their own corruption.
For anyone who's outside of the faith, that frustrates us too when people do that.
We get it, and so does God.
And we try to stray away from that.
Just remember, whenever something seems unjust, God will probably feel it even more. I mean, depending on what we're talking about, sometimes we think something's unjust, it's really not. We're just selfish.
Well, the best thing is to bring it to God and to be like, God, I don't know how to feel about this. Is this right? And I mean, I've seen it personally with friends or family friends of getting drawn in by corrupt leaders, and you just, you try to have the discernment, and that's why it's always stay alert, because the enemy prowls like a lion.
Yeah, indeed.
It's real, and he works through religious leaders, because that's who a lot of people trust, unfortunately.
Yeah,
and
he has to.
Leads to a struggle.
Or wants to. Yeah, but also didn't expect the storm would last as long as it has. Being in the storm is hard, and I mean, maybe sometimes we can take it for granted, but when you're in the storm, you know you're in the storm.
Yeah.
And Andy definitely feels that throughout the entire film, and pretty much everyone, I would say. But Andy's different, and he's, I guess, a bit sensitive to certain things, and
he's our main character.
He's our main character, so he has to be, But yeah, and if you're going through the storm, I mean, know that God is with you in the storm. It's like when the disciples are on the boat with Jesus, and this giant storm happens while they're on the boat.
Yeah.
And everyone's freaking out. They're like, oh my goodness, there's a storm. And Jesus is just in the back sleeping. He's just sleeping.
Yeah.
And they're like, Jesus, don't you care for us? We're going to drown.
And then he comes up calm, and just silences everything.
Silence the storm. And then the storm just quiets. He's like, oh, you of little faith. I'm here with you guys.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I was thinking you were going. That's great. I was thinking you were going Jesus walking on water.
I mean, that one too.
Kind of
that
thing.
One too. Yeah.
And Peter walking out to him and looks around and just sees the storm, even though Jesus is right there, and he falls.
And then Jesus grabs him and says, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?"
Yeah. We've all been through a storm or going through a storm, and it often feels longer than we would have hoped.
Indeed. Yeah.
But know that Jesus is there, and
he suffers with you.
He won't let you fall.
Yeah.
Okay?
Just keep your eyes on him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you'll be fine.
So we're getting to the good quotes of the movie. Red has some of my favorite dialogue almost ever written. So obviously the big one from this movie, get busy living or get busy dying. That's something that I think anyone takes away, because for some reason we just need a reminder sometimes to live.
Yeah.
But I think from a Christ standpoint too, it's get busy living or get busy dying. They say it harsh in the movie. It is a harsh reality of
it's a choice.
Yeah.
Choose wisely.
Yeah.
And discern.
You have the choice, but I would choose living.
Me too. It's hard, but it's worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I love the sometimes all it takes is pressure and time.
Pressure and time.
Where they're talking about he was constantly digging the tunnel to escape.
I thought it would take 600 years.
Yeah, but he only did it in less than 20.
In less than 20.
And he's like, sometimes all anything takes is pressure and time.
Yeah.
And it's true. Sometimes you gotta pressure through with God, not without God. We can't do it on our own strength, and it takes time. Yeah. And we have to know that, and we have to. Yeah. Even enjoy it.
We're very much creatures of the moment.
Especially nowadays.
I know a lot of times we're I need to be in the moment, but we're we have a hard time grasping the big picture.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to see past what's right in front of us.
Yeah.
But it is that endurance that we talked about. Suffering produces endurance, which it produces character, which produces hope. That endurance has to be produced.
And hope does not put us to shame. So
absolutely,
it's great.
Yeah, time and pressure. Love that.
Yeah.
I didn't notice this before. I don't know why. Maybe it just passed my mind. But I love that when they flip to the rock hammer, it's in Exodus.
Yeah.
Because it's his Exodus.
It's his Exodus.
That's so funny.
It seems he doesn't get to the New Testament in that rock hammer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. If we had utter freedom, would we be able to handle it? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's we see two cases of these prisoners who have been in here so long, going out into the real world, and we see that even though Red, makes it out, it has negative impacts, which it raises the question is where do you go? What do you do? Yeah. And it made me think we often want God to just tell us everything. We think if we knew everything, it would be easier. But I feel this kind of raises the question of if we had that complete freedom, if God just unleashed it all upon us, would we be able to handle it? Would it be the best thing for us?
Yeah.
I mean, in a very metaphorical sense, we've lived in like Shawshank, like
Yeah.
you know, our reality is Shawshank, what we know, this brokenness, this hurt.
Yeah.
If we got complete freedom like Red or like Brooks, like would we be able to handle it, or would we find that we don't know what we're doing? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a thing to wrestle with, and I think we have to trust that God is omnipotent and omni-good and knowing and everything.
Omni-good.
Omni-good, omnibenevolent. And so if we trust in that, which we do, then trust that he also knows what's best for us. And even if we don't get the response, or we don't understand why sometimes,
Or we're angry about it.
or confused, know that he knows what's best. It's like when you're a kid and your parents would protect you and wouldn't tell you everything because you weren't meant to know. You weren't meant to know exactly the horrors of the world. But even like simple stuff of like, hey, stop eating candy because you've ate a lot. And it's like, but why? And it's like, it's not good for you.
Yeah, or it's that parenting thing is like, you might be able to tell, like, you tell your kid, don't put your hand on the stove, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe you even like see them going to do it. Yeah. And it's like, you can either pull their hand away or maybe not the stove, but say like an iron or something. You can pull their hand away, you see it, you see the danger, you've already told them about it, but they might need to put their hand on it for half a second to understand what that pain is.
Yeah.
You know, they might not understand from just telling. And I think God does a parenting thing with us a lot is, you know, sometimes he tells us, sometimes he doesn't, but if he tells us the right thing to do and then maybe we mess up and we're like, God, why did you let me do this? It's like, you know, you might not have gotten it if I just like pulled you away from that, you know?
Yeah, you would have gone back to it. I mean, he tells Adam and Eve in the garden, he says, do not eat from the tree of life. And then he gives them the choice to do whatever they want.
And they suffer the consequences.
And they suffer the consequences.
But
so it's not like God doesn't tell us things or doesn't want us to know. It's just
I like the comparison to parents like not telling their children everything, because if like, you know, you're telling your young child from day one about the horrors of the world, like that's
too much.
That's a whole nother conversation of like, you know, exposing versus sheltering, and also I don't have a lot of experience in that, but there is something to the fact that it's got to be gradual in some sense. They
have to be mature.
Yeah.
And God waits for us to be spiritually mature to show us certain things. And yet we won't know everything.
That's good.
So
yeah,
good stuff.
Yeah, we're still on spiritual training wheels, I suppose.
Indeed.
It's time to land the plane.
Let's do it.
We're honing in on the heart of the movie. We've kind of, you know, talked about it here and there. It's very hope-centered. And we talked about how the difference between Red and Brooks is he had hope. He had hope that Andy had given him the promise. Yeah. You know, a lot of our hope is based on, you know, God's promise, God's covenant of Christ coming back, or trusting him. So Red holds on to that promise. And I just love that you wrote this. So
Jesus gives true freedom of everything, including fear. Red deals with a lot of fear of the outside world, and just being in the world in this just new environment is scary for him, just like it was for Brooks. But Jesus gives us true freedom in everything, including fear. And I think what Red goes through is kind of a testament to that. Although there's no mention of him believing in Jesus, but I mean in the sense of what his character goes through and how we can relate that to our lives a little bit.
Yeah.
We do fear sometimes, and we need Jesus to help us relinquish that fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then great quote of hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies.
Yeah. This is what I think is the heart of the movie. Like we were debating of like, is it get busy living or get busy dying? What's actually the heart of this movie? Because that's a great line.
Yeah.
But I think it is this that kind of rings true for the message of the movie, is that hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies. And I think that's the truth in Jesus.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I mean, God calls everything in the beginning good. So why wouldn't he want to salvage that good?
Yeah.
Right? That's still, I think, in part way, we're broken, but there's a good in us because of what God created, right?
Yeah.
And we get more when we receive the Holy Spirit. Not because we're good, because He's good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, He is hope. He defeated death. And so hope in Him is a good thing, even in our worst circumstances, even in our storms or our Shawshanks.
Yeah.
He is good.
He's good.
And then the end of the movie really, says it all, and what it's been throughout the movie.
Just do it with a friend.
Do it with a friend.
Do it with a friend. If the Lord of the Rings episode didn't remind you of that, then this one will wake you up to it too. Mm-hmm. Doing it with a friend, doing it with community. God always wants us to be in good, godly community and to reach out to people. And because it helps us as well. It helps the others and it helps us.
Yes.
And we've experienced that as well, right? With not only us, but our other friends as well.
Mm-hmm.
And being in a community with, also believers as well. So
yeah,
it's all good stuff.
Do it with a friend.
Do it with a friend.
And hold on to hope.
Mm.
And that pretty much sums up the Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, great film.
Yeah, great stuff.
Film. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for watching along.
Mm-hmm.
What are we reviewing next time?
We are doing Oppenheimer.
Ooh.
So that's a big one.
We're getting the Barbenheimer.
We're getting the Barbenheimer
in here.
thing
We
going.
did Barbie. We got to get the other half.
We do have to warn, it is rated R.
Mm-hmm.
So
this was rated R too, right?
I believe so.
Yeah.
This was rated R as well.
I forget if we warned. We probably did.
Well, I think we did.
I don't know. It doesn't matter.
Oppenheimer's rated R. It contains, really what's rated R is language, but also nudity.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're subject to that, if that, triggers you or causes you to have lustful thoughts and stuff like that,
yep.
Don't watch it or skip the parts.
Be cautious.
Yeah.
Pray about it.
Yeah. If you feel convicted not to watch it, don't watch it.
Absolutely. But we believe God's got something to say through it, and can't wait to break that down.
Indeed. Can you pray us out, Isaac?
I shall. God, thank you for this day, just for this episode, and God, I just thank you that the suffering is not meaningless, Lord, that there is purpose behind it and that you are in it, that we can count it joy, Lord. Lord, I pray that truly suffering produces endurance, which produces character, which produces hope. And God, that we hold on to that hope and see that it's you, Lord. God, may your will be done, and may you just continue to reveal yourself to us. We love you, God. Amen.
Amen.